Cullen live in 1 minute. Welcome to Lynn Cullen Live at pghcitypaper.com. Email your questions and comments to Lynn at pghcitypaper.com.
All right, come on.
What? No, I'm not doing it. I'm telling you, I am not singing. We're not starting this show with a song. People out there are hurting as it is.
Well, that's why. Oh,
okay,
I see.
You sing. I don't want to inflict it on them. I'm also congested. I'm not in good voice.
I say that, whatever. We have a choice of oobla-dee, oobla-da. Life goes on. Or we have que sera, sera. Whatever will be, will be.
I was going to say this attitude will last exactly 5 more seconds. So you just want to, shall we let the purging begin?
Well, I listen. I saw this coming. I mean, anybody who's listened to me, and because I was getting daily reports from my poor old mom, who now is.
You've talked to her since last night.
No, but she knew it was a loss.
Okay.
Not
even like an email, not even a little.
No, I wanted to leave her alone.
Okay.
I'm knowing her. She probably went to bed, pulled the covers over her head, and is
still there.
And knowing her, she went outside this morning and pulled her sign off the front yard. It's over.
Yeah.
Okay, so the biggest surprise, I guess, was because we were told in the waning days that the polls just a day before the election showed it 50-50.
Yeah, I didn't see a poll that showed it that close.
You didn't?
No, I'd heard that there was some tightening, but I don't think I saw anything closer than 5 or 6 points.
Well, okay.
There had been early yesterday. There was some talk that some of the early exit polls showed that, but.
Okay, so what's it all about?
Are we going to do this entirely?
No. What does it mean? What's it all? What do you think? I mean, because obviously now everybody is saying, "Oh, this portends ill for the Democrats, for Obama. This shows the Tea Party is still there and ascendant, and their values resonate even in a seemingly so-called used to be just a day or two ago progressive state like Wisconsin." What do you think? Are you going to sneeze?
No.
Oh. What do you think happened?
I mean, I think a few things. One is I think the Tea Party is still there. I don't think that means they're ascendant still. I mean, I think they're a force to be reckoned with. There used to be it used to be sort of an axiom of politics that high turnout elections favor Democrats. That clearly, I mean, I don't think that hasn't been true in more recent years. It certainly wasn't true in Wisconsin last night, and I think the Tea Party may have something to do with that. I would say, to me, the big issue is this. When exit polls were conducted, they asked people, what do you think the appropriate circumstances are to call a recall election?
Right. A lot of people did not think
and 60% of them, 60% of the voters said only in cases where there was actual,
true
wrongdoing.
Right.
Wrongdoing. And I think 12% said you should never have one at all. Now, granted, some of those 12% were people who had it been a Republican or a Democrat in the governor's office, they would have said, oh, sure, you should have them with ever. I mean, clearly people were kind of.
But right there, you've got to combine 72% of people who are leery about recall elections and specifically recall elections like this that are politically based.
I mean, clearly, yeah. And I think think if you wanted to say something nice about Wisconsin voters, which maybe we should do, we could say that, these same values of Wisconsin of sort of, fair play for all and da-da-da may have factored in, at least as far as some independents go, saying, you know what, this is BS.
We
Elections
elected
have
the guy,
consequences.
right.
This is just a big attempt at a do-over, and I'm not going to get behind that. And I think there's something to that. I think it doesn't bode anything at all for Barack Obama in November, because even those exit polls showed that 7%. He had a 7% margin over
Romney with the
Romney
same voters,
among the same exact
voters.
contingent of voters.
Right.
So I mean. That said, so I don't think there's really much of an implication for this November. I think longer term there are some issues, though, and they have to do with people's attitudes about unions.
Okay, I want to get into that, but since you mentioned Obama, I want to ask why, because he'll come in for criticism from the left. Why do you think he kept this at arm's length, as did, I saw that the Republican Governors Association gave $8 million to Walker. I didn't see the similar Democratic organization of any kind giving anything.
Right.
So what? Why? What? Another big aspect of this that some people think played into the outcome is the money, and that the Walker side had 7 to 8 times. For every dollar our side spent, they had 8.
Right. I think that's a. Are you okay?
Oh, shut up.
I think that's
relax.
I don't know. I feel a couple different ways about that. One is, here's why Obama didn't get in on it, because there's a distinction to be made between what Obama did and what, say, the Democratic Governors Association did. Right? Obama didn't touch this because Obama's people knew that that Barrett was probably going to lose. And had Obama really gotten behind it foursquare, look, you can go back and look at, because you remember last year there was a series of recall elections for the Republican senators, state senators. I can't remember the exact number. I think there were 4 Republican state senators last year who were up for recall.
No, this was yesterday.
No, but no. There's last year there was a vote to recall some of those guys, and as a result the Democrats won 2 of those, but lost a couple others.
Okay.
You know which one I'm talking about now?
Yeah.
So at that time, you can go back and you can look at Nate Silver, who's kind of the polling prognostication guy at the New York Times. And Nate Silver said at that time, the fact that they weren't able to clear house here basically suggests that there's a sort of limit to how far this anti-Walker sentiment is really going to go. And even back then, there were doubts about how far you could carry this
So was
thing.
it a strategic mistake?
Yes, because no, I don't think so.
To call for the recall.
To call for a recall? I don't know. You take a run at it, and let's look at the upside of it. For as disappointing as the governor's side was, the Democrats did capture the state Senate because they did get an extra seat last night.
Are you sure? I thought that was.
That's what I had heard. It was 8. That he had a margin of 800 seats. That's the last thing I heard about that.
800 votes. You mean?
800
That's
votes,
not enough to declare victory. But
No.
it could be that Walker will have a Democratic Senate to deal with. But
for the next few months, anyway. Even if they win it, obviously the whole thing goes up for grabs in November. So. So is it a mistake? I don't know. It's easy. Of course, now it's easy to say it looks like a mistake. I certainly think that it was not a mistake look, the tweeting thing was pretty ridiculous. He tweeted the day before the election, I support Barrett in this race. I think he'd be a great governor.
Yeah, just shut up.
Yeah,
right?
just don't insult us.
Right.
But I understand why he didn't do it, because if he had done it and the result had been the same, then you'd really hear the Republicans saying it was a referendum on Obama.
That's true.
And I think he didn't want to give credence to that, so I think that's why he didn't do it.
But do you approve of his of that political calculation, or would you have preferred him to have put his muscle and his name behind the effort?
The fighter in me would have loved to have seen him out there. Before he was elected president, he said, he made statements like, if those Republicans take on unions, I'll be there walking with you along the picket line.
Well,
and I think there's a question now. I saw somebody tweet this earlier today. When November comes, will labor just tweet its support for Obama? Which, in a way, I understand that. But I honestly do not believe that if Obama had been more visible in this fight, I don't think it would have changed the outcome. This was a 7 percentage point margin. It's too big, and the issues were too local, and they were too unique to Wisconsin for an attempt to nationalize it to succeed. So, and honestly, the money thing, I don't know. I mean, I also saw some data that said most people had made up their mind about where they were going to.
But let's say it came down to 1% or 2% of voters. Then that money that's where the money makes the difference. It's just that it costs more per voter.
Sure. Right. Yes. Yeah, no.
We don't know. There's no way to know the impact. I mean,
it's hard. I mean, obviously, look. I mean,
wouldn't you rather be the people who had the $8 than the $1?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No question. And obviously, whether it's spending money on trying to convince people to vote a certain way in an election or to buy a certain kind of bar soap, clearly some very smart people
know how to
know that advertising works because they spend a buttload of money on it.
That's right.
So it would be naive to think that has no effect on shaping people's expectations. I do think though that we probably need to sort of think also beyond that a little bit, because there's a sort of consoling fiction that just oh well, they outspent us, and so we never really had a chance or whatever. I just don't know that that's necessary.
Well, that first of all lets yourself off the hook. We were outspent. I think you need to engage in a little more critical soul searching than that.
Before we went, I mean, I think the one other issue is one of the exit poll questions was, do you approve of what Governor Walker has done in terms of labor law?
Right.
And the vote there was 52 to 47% that they did favor it. I mean, that's what you're up against. Both sides did a fantastic job of turning out voters for their cause. And as much as I disagree, apparently a majority of Wisconsin was okay with what he did, or at least didn't see a convincing reason to turn him out.
Let's clarify what he did. What he did was take away a right that most don't public employee unions have this right all over the country? He took it away, the right to collectively bargain. Yeah. In other words, the very essence of why a person would join a union. Because in numbers there is that strength. So you go in and you bargain with the management as a group. This is the essence of what unionism is. And he outlawed it, essentially, for public employees. And it's amazing to me. Wisconsin was the first state that allowed public employees to collectively bargain. And I've said this before, and I will say it again. That right was granted with a Republican governor and a bipartisan, unanimous legislature 50 some years ago. And this shows how far afield the Republicans have come.
And in this particular case, I mean, the tragic irony for those unions is, from my understanding, they were willing to make the concessions necessary to balance the budget. So this wasn't about just sort of we've got a budget problem. This is about putting the screws to these folks, and for no really very good reason. And I think that this is, but I think too, this isn't just happening out of nowhere. There's been a concerted effort for a lot of years to sort of alienate, to divide and conquer, to use the phrase of the day, public sector unions from everybody else.
Well, to demonize government employees in general and government in general.
And one reason it
very
works,
successful.
One reason it works is because people feel like, you might get upset about the bank bailout or whatever, but the impact on your pocketbook of something like that, it's kind of nebulous. It's hard to see. When you are in struggling in hard economic times, and we should just acknowledge this as a psychological truth.
Absolutely.
When you are hurting and having a hard time of it, and many of us are, it is just psychologically difficult to wrap your head around the concept of your tax dollars,
your money going
to people
to
who aren't having such a hard time of it and probably have a better benefits package. And I think we all get that on some level. We understand it as an intellectual proposition. I think we don't necessarily sometimes understand how that can animate people and make them really resentful and angry.
Oh, it absolutely does.
And so and that's something we're going to have to.
I mean, I don't know. Are you going to have a pension? No. Are you going to, have health benefits till the day you die, even after retirement?
Yeah. I mean,
nobody else has that. And so you bet there's resentment. If I don't have it, damn it, why should I pay you to have it?
Do we have a call? The call went away.
Why, and I completely, look, if that ain't a human emotion, I don't know what would be.
Right. And I mean, part of it is there's a desire to sort of call upon the better angels of our own nature, but again, especially especially in tough economic times.
That's right.
I remember when I was a kid, I was thinking about this morning. We lived very near the corporate headquarters for Consolidated Coal. For some reason, they were located out there, and there was a labor protest. There was a picket line out in front of that building. And I remember one of the workers holding a sign that said something about health benefits. And I can't remember exactly what the demand was, but I remember my mother was driving the car. I was maybe 10 or 11 years old. She said, ugh, as if anybody has that.
And
like,
that was some neat
and that's just my mother, right? This is my mother, also a child of Southern California, political, left of the average American voter. And I just remember thinking, and that's always stuck with me, partly because she was left of center or whatever.
And she didn't have any sympathy.
And these weren't public workers. These were it didn't make any difference to my mother.
Right.
I mean, it's not like we had a coal cellar. People weren't going to be shoveling coal. Like the coal in our cellar wasn't going to change prices as a result of this, and yet she still resented.
Okay, so let's talk. Okay, we got a caller. Go ahead, caller. Okay, and we got this back. Remember that? Yeah. Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. Hey, I know I'm preaching to the choir. This is the only part I don't get. It's not the pensions and the benefits. It's the fact... It's the fact that they're changing the rules. If you want to hire everyone after today and don't provide those benefits, that's fine. But I really have a problem with taking away what's been agreed to in the past, including the great benefits.
Even if it's financially okay, she's gone. Even if it's financially unsustainable, I mean, seriously.
Yeah.
I mean, I think sometimes when you crunch the numbers, it is in some situations.
Yeah, I mean, that's the great irony of all this stuff is, in terms of their actual take-home salary, a lot of public sector employees aren't actually really, I mean, it's not that lucrative. I mean, if you look at
what they have.
But what they have is these pensions.
And the reason is
and
the health
because the politicians can promise it in the short run, and the cost is accrued over the long run. So on the one hand, that's how it works. And so you say to yourself, well, they made a decision to take a future promise in lieu of present salaries, and that's true. They did that, just like the caller was saying. A promise was made, and we should look what
in the private sector what they did.
Yeah.
Look what they did to all the steel workers who thought they had pensions.
Oh,
and
yeah, talk to some of the employees of LTV and about promises broken.
No problem there.
So and there are people who say the same should be done here. You got
get ready. There's going to be this terrible noise. Hello, caller.
Yeah, you just touched on what I was going to say. Anybody that's on a government pension right now, that's retired when they're like 55, if they think they're going to get that pension until they're 85, 90 years old, they're smoking dope, because
I agree.
That's not going to happen. It's going to be cut back so much that people aren't even going to get those pensions and that.
No.
The money's not there, and it's a damn shame, but that's the way it's going to be.
I agree with you.
Thank you.
Thanks
for the call.
Okay, so let's talk about, so you see what we have here is some seriously bad decision-making by in the private sector, from the union side, everybody making these grand agreements that make them look wonderful at the time, and refusing to look down the road and imagine that this is a promise that is unsustainable. Right? I mean, kicking it down the road, as you say, essentially.
It's hard for me to fault union leaders for making the same kind of calculation that everybody else made, which is people believe that if you put this pension fund in the stock market or whatever, you can count on 8%
I know,
annualized.
But so we know otherwise now. Okay?
Right. Yes,
we know otherwise. Yes. Those were all the wisdoms we were told.
Yes.
And when people say, the steel industry went down because the unions were so greedy, and they had to, and I always said, wait a minute, they didn't bargain with themselves. I mean, no.
There was a counterparty, right?
The industry inked those agreements. So, I want to talk about the success of the powers that be, and I'm talking about the capitalists, the moneyed interests, the powerful, the ones that pretty much seem to control our government and everything else, and our media and everything. Don't you think that the American people have been worked on for decades now to have a certain mindset. And I mean, I don't know how you go back and correct that, short of, like a bunch of Trotskyites taken to the street and being successful.
Right.
I don't see how.
Yeah.
So Americans are used to not asking for much. Americans are used to look at workers as expendable people, even when it's themselves.
Right.
Americans have been taught to not have a regard for labor, but to worship capital. I mean, so given that's the environment and has been for decades, generations now, I say our side is screwed. I don't even know how you get the word out.
Yeah.
Fewer people are members of unions, and if other governors now are emboldened by Walker's win and try to do the same, and you'll have public workers unions being destroyed. By the way, they are a bulwark of the Democratic Party.
Right.
You can see the powers that be consolidating all of their wins, all of this hard work, little things that we didn't even notice were being, the fact that there's a business section in the paper, but there never is a labor section. Right. Who ever heard of such a thing?
Right.